So great, we have started the recording. So over to Sandeep and team.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Rajiv, for very kind words and introduction. Uni, you can go to full PowerPoint mode, please. Yeah, as Rajiv, nicely put it. I think the basic genesis or the basic DNA of Algo is around investment. We just completed our first year, and we are very, passionate about bringing a lot of processes, standardization, technology into the field of law. And the basic reason for that is that very little effort has been made. And whenever you talk about law or investment, the first reaction which comes out is, say it's very complicated. We have to deal with what kind of beast we are going to deal with it. And trust me, not because we have done it, Unni, Neha, Rahul, part of my team, we are doing it day in and day out, but it is actually not very complicated. And that's the mission. When I spend about 15 years in investment world as in-house, looking from investor side, whether it is Intel Capital or whether it is Sequoia Capital, I always used to feel, very, very sad that how the partners outside in the ecosystem are not presenting simple solutions. For example, just to raise a capital, it should not be taking 3 months or 4 months time as a process. And it should not become taxing for the founders. It should be a happy experience that people should, completely understand that, by end of it, not only they got the investment, but they also got better understanding of their businesses, of the areas, which are sensitive. And they also are much more comfortable in dealing with the issues going forward. There is no ghost in the room, or there is nothing at the back of the mind that, this process become complicated. But unfortunately, that has been my experience. And obviously, I'm very passionate about interface of law and technology. And thanks to all the, entrepreneurs, and especially technology entrepreneurs, they have been developing some amazing tech. Now it is up to each industry, whether it is legal, fintech, finance, healthcare, and others, whether they want to adopt and implement and, bring those solutions out for the market. And all of us, 55, 56 of us, we believe in that. And every day a lot of effort is made. Recently a great recognition happened for all of us. We are recognized by Financial Times London as the most innovative law firm in India and number 12 in Asia Pacific in just first year. And trust me when I'm saying we haven't done too much. It's just the basic thing, because all of us, we starting point is same, and the process how it will flow is same. Quick introduction about us. We are today 55 lawyers. We have 3 offices. If COVID had not happened, we would have started as a Singapore registered firm also. Today, we are ranked number 5 in terms of the deal volumes in entire India, based on the latest data by Venture Intelligence. The combined experience of the team we have collectively, if I'll just go to my team page, but Neha, Unni, me, Rahul, and with other team members, we have done more than 10 billion plus kind of investment, and more than 3,000 rounds. If you see our team, I was employee number 1, Dhruv. It's a very nice mix of team. Just to give you an idea, what we try to do is we try to give you a single point solution of all the problems relating to investment or running businesses. For example, we have tax people on board. You're meeting Unni and Rahul, who are corporate secretaries and specialists on all the corporate structures. Neha and I handle the legal piece of it. We have Smita here who, joined. Unni, I will tell you when to roll the foils here. Please. So here we have Smita, who is the senior tax partner, and she joined us from, PwC. So when we look at a problem, we try to, pass it around in the group, and then we see the problem from all angles. Dhruv, who is our chief operating officer, is, PhD in maths with, he's bringing a lot of data science into the problem of law. We have full innovation office team, chief innovation officer. We have a very nice mix of 25% non-lawyers versus 75% lawyers. The idea is that it is not only a legal firm, it is we are solving the business problem, and each of the partner that you are seeing come from an entrepreneurial background. Some of them, they started their ventures. Ankit, who is here, recently sold his technology startup. He was working with JSA, then he was in-house with Westbridge Partners, and then he started a online coding company, and within a year he got a very good acquisition. And so the entrepreneurship is within the DNA of our firm, and that's a very core part of what we do. Only we can go to the next one. As I said, what we try to do is we look at the areas of practice, and we bring in technology around it. So every piece of problem which is there, we have mapped a technology or a solution which is there. We have also started our own legal tech company called Quant Legal Tech, where I am the main investor or a benefactor behind it from Singapore. Today, that company itself has 40 plus lawyers and 40 plus professionals, 27 engineers, and rest of them are, the service specialist in terms of that. And company is doing good. But both the setups are independent, while Algo Legal is also sourcing multiple technologies from other system players, and and Quant Legal is working with different players. But for lawyers and the subject experts to have access to the engineers, I think some of you can relate to that particular advantage. That is one of the unique, vantage point we have in the system. Main technology, when we talk about, we believe that, the core of everything should be a storage, which should come up with a single point storage system. Anyone who want to access anything relating to the legal or any critical document should be able to access within 30 seconds. And that's where, a lot of cloud-based strategies are there. When COVID happened, I think we are the only law firm which were able to, continue to work without any problems at all, because most of it is on SharePoints, cloud storage. And therefore, from this sessions point of view, security has been not at all an issue. So, starting from the kind of work which is required, whether it is fundraising, whether it is an ongoing legal support to the companies post fundraising, everything has been tracked beautifully with us. Only let's just go on to the next one. So today, what we are going to do is, basically, first is all of you are having companies, so what is the crucial legal aspects with respect to the startup journey? Then obviously, bringing our own experience from the market, not only into a point of law, but also from the point of view of the venture capital. What is the ecosystem? What is this beast all about? What kind of companies are likely to be funded? What is the normal equity ratios which will work up during this? And also then, Neha will walk us through the cybersecurity and data privacy laws and the landscape. What are initiatives which are being taken by the government in this space? What are the best practices around that? So we will touch upon those issues also. Only let's go to the next one. Next one, please, Uni. Yeah, just skip to the next one.
Yes, Sandeep.
Yeah, just get into PowerPoint mode, no?
Yeah, one sec. Yeah. Yes. So I'll take it up from here, Sandeep.
Yeah, please.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Uni here. So we'll start with the first step. We'll talk about the first step that we need to take for forming an entity. And always the question is, what type of entity needs to be formed to start a business. Generally, people talk about partnership, which is seen everywhere. So, is it a partnership that is the right model, right structure, or whether we should form a company? Even within the company, there are three types of companies: public company, private company, one person company, and also then there is a semi partnership form, which is LLPs. So these are the commonly seen entity structures in India. So what is the right form of entity? when a promoter wants to start his business. So this is the question always comes to us, and in our experience, uh, so many people say that okay, we will start as a proprietor and then we'll see later whether the company to be formed or not, or we'll start as a partnership and then we'll see later to form a company, whether forming a company is an expensive thing or the compliance cost is high in a company versus a partnership. So all these questions comes to the mind, and they come to us with these questions. So the answer to this is very simple. What is the business strategy? What is that a promoter is looking for in the future? If they want to have an investment from an investor from a PC or PE, the right structure is always a company, because LLPs are not a preferred structure. There are exceptions to it if it is an investment in at a holding company level, and then have the downstream investment is to an LLP. Maybe that structure could be accepted, but to make it very simple, so every investor prefer to invest in a private limited company because there is the ownership is divided into shares, and these shares are easily transferable and can be sold, they can exit easily, and also the shareholders liabilities are limited to the capital that they have brought in. So with this legal protection, investors always prefer to have a company. And from going through the profile of the participants, I've seen that some of them are proprietorship, and then I see some of them are incorporated in US Inc. And then I could see that some of them are LLP. So in case if you have any questions on that, please let me know on the entity structure. We can address that. Then next is on the jurisdiction based, what is the right place to incorporate a company, because we have seen people saying that we have incorporated a company in Singapore now, but we want to have the developers from India. What is the right structure and things like that? Yes, that is also possible. But only thing again we should keep in mind is that the money from India, if invested outside, let's say a promoter in India is investing outside India, and then if he wants to have a subsidiary in India, then he can't bring the money back. So there are some restrictions around it, but this is also possible. And also see what is which market a company wants to explore. If having a head office or a company registered in Singapore may help to sell your products in other countries. So it all depends on business need as well, but all these structures are there. So it's all there is no one model which suits everyone. So but these models can work. So this is also very normal thing. And again, the other factor that we should keep in mind is the IP ownership. If you want to consolidate the valuation at a holding company level at other jurisdiction where the protection seems to be better than India, then that's a good model to have a holding company at a foreign jurisdiction and having a Indian company as a subsidiary. Again, one another factor that can be kept in mind is on the exit strategy. So maybe some of the investors prefer to invest in other jurisdiction because of the regulatory easiness in the regulatory compliances exit models, which anyway Sandeep will be talking about in the later slides while talking about PE, VC, strategies and things like that. So these are the various factors that needs to be kept in mind while forming an entity, what type of entity, where it is to be formed. Then coming to the so 2-3 common questions that we have seen is whether the name of the needs to be the name of the product or service or the brand name that the company may have? No, not necessarily. The brand name could be different. I can take an example of Ola. Ola is a good example. Ola is not the company name. They have a different name as the entity name. So it is possible, and this can be trademarked and protected. So that is possible. Then coming to the next one is resident director and of local registered office. So what we have seen in is that in almost all the jurisdictions all over the world, resident director is mandatory. So there are we help to set up companies in other jurisdictions, and we also help in getting the resident directors and also local registered office. So resident director was not mandatory in India, but it is mandatory in India with the New Companies Act. Then other factor is restrictions. So when there is a foreign investment in a company, there are certain restrictions. Some are, some of the investment can come on an automatic route where there is no prior approval required, but only certain filings are required. Whereas some of them are very much banned, restricted, and some of them are with the approval route. So with this,
only one point here, which is very important. Just go back to the previous slide. I think, again, to make things very simple, the outcome of these 2-3 slides is very simple, that people say 20 different structures are there. Is it LLP? Is it public company, private company? So the simple structure for you guys to start off with is a private company. Reason being there that all those are specialized structure. And what investors, as Unni rightly said, wants to, look into a particular setup is, a simplicity and shareholding being clearly divided and owners of the shares being completely clear. And in terms of any investor coming in, follow-on rounds and the future exits can happen at great ease. So the only structure which, let you do with the minimal cost, with very low compliances to achieve those objectives is a private limited company structure. Thanks to the initiative by the Government of India, incorporation of the company and the process has become much more smoother. Now, while you are not clear on the brand name and other thing, what counts is the vintage of the company. Therefore, it is very important that with a given name, what you find is available based on the search through registrar of companies. Please try to register your company as quickly as possible. The multiple advantages of that: A, you can always change the name little later. You can convert the name if available in a brand name, and the company name can be same. You can just continue to do that. And the most critical part is that at least that name is available and you can register and start the company and raising of capital and other thing. Because first question investor always asks is, how old is the company, right? So those things can be tackled and answers very carefully, and that piece work beautifully in that. Now, the point on FDI restriction is there are very few sectors. So if we go back 10 to 15 years, every sector under FERA, which was there, Foreign Exchange Reservation Act was there. There was, everything relating to foreign exchange, inbound money coming, money going out was all restricted. Now what has happened under FEMA, it is a management of the foreign exchange. There is a lot of flexibility, but there are still certain sectors, for example, telecom, insurance, and other sector which are restricted. And foreign capital beyond certain limit cannot be in those sectors. But the field that today we are dealing, it is 100% open sector. There are no prior approval required unless off late the restrictions which has come from China. So that is one piece which has taken the entire sector out of the gear. So therefore, but what happens every time a FDI or a foreign direct investment is there, or a foreign investor like Sequoia, Nexus, or anyone is there, you have certain pre and post compliances before raising this capital. That's the only thing which is there. Therefore, those requirements are also important. And what we are going to touch upon in later slide is when you are expanding into other countries, what is the reason for that? At that point also, the FDI, it is not only foreign direct inbound investment, it is the investment which is being done in foreign currency in foreign countries that also will come into purview. Only carry on. So now we are just
Yeah.
next slide, which is on externalization. So guys, as Unni rightly said, unfortunately, I'm part of Techstar mentorship program. I'm part of Microsoft mentorship program. With TIE, we are doing a lot of initiative. And I'm very sad at the rate at which founders, without even applying their mind, are trying to go abroad, and they are saying, oh, we are a US company, we are Singapore based company. And when I asked them the reason that why you decided to become a US or a Singapore company, and what was the reason? See, incorporation is very easy. There are companies where you pay $450, they will do the full paperwork for you. But the question is, do you exactly need that kind of thing? Is the business model justifying this externalization? In simple words, what externalization means is that a company which is domiciled and registered out of India is now going to be headed and going to be registered out of a different jurisdiction outside India. The choices today, the favorite are Singapore, US, Delaware Corporation, and all. And the Indian company will become the subsidiary of that company. But the most important point is, when I asked these founders that why you're becoming a US company, they said, oh, just because we are US companies, lot of investors are going to automatically come and invest into our companies. So first, I want to just tell them that this is a biggest wrong notion in the market, that just because you are going to be registered out of a particular jurisdiction, investors are going to come. Investors are going to come in any jurisdiction only if there is a solid base business model. And there are multiple considerations which come before an externalized decision has to be taken or not. My request to all of you is, just don't do a blindfold because your friend has gone to some other jurisdiction. You're also incorporating from that. That is not there. There is a 140, 50 points of checks which are there, and practices keep evolving. And we have floated multiple papers on our LinkedIn and on our website, which you can check. Because what are the tax consideration? You people, all of the founders, I'm assuming, are Indian resident. The minute a company is incorporated abroad, one of the important requirement is there has to be people running that company from that jurisdiction. Now imagine you have incorporated a Delaware corporation and you're still sitting in India. How will be the Delaware corporation will be treated, or a company as a overall structure will be treated as a US company, if decision makers and the brain of that company is still sitting in a different jurisdiction? So that is first consideration. Then there are a lot of these cost consideration, because the minute you start a company in Singapore, in US, it is not about the the initial setup of cost, which is like, say, $1,000 at a max, but it is about the cost of dealing with those auditors, cost of dealing with the things. Those are other important things. Now, another important thing which come up is that, investors want to see that there is a genuinity in that planning which is being done. If you just say that, oh, I am going to all my clients are based out of India and I've been into a US based company or a Singapore based company, none of the investors are going to touch you. Now, what are the consideration in which externalization makes sense? For example, my product is a global product and I'm getting huge traction from US. And I will draw, this can be solved in a very simple piece of paper, that when I put my revenue forecast and projections on a piece of paper, I would first like to see where I am going to get maximum revenue. And please make a best case analysis, not for a year, but for a 5 to 6 years going forward. Now, if the answer is that majority of my revenue, or 70-80% of my revenue, is going to come from a foreign jurisdiction, then it absolute makes sense to be making a study, doing a proper study, and being present into those jurisdictions. There are other advantages because you limit your liability into that jurisdiction. For example, my customers and clients of US can be under a contract from those respective jurisdiction. I also get a lot of product liability insurance benefit from those jurisdictions, so I can be there. Then obviously the regulatory framework, and many of those countries, the foreign capital coming in, going out is very, very easy as compared to India, because India is still holding, Indian regulatory authorities are holding certain things in a very close environment. So that can be done. Now, other thing is, if business is genuinely growing, the premium or the delta that you get. For example, if I'm making $100 million revenue in India versus in US or Singapore, because those markets are matured, you get multiple fold of valuations, and the kind of investor community which is available there is very, very different, and they take it to a different account. Then obviously the global IPOs and the higher valuations which are there on exit is another premium point. So my only key takeaways on this slide is that this exercise should be done with a lot of meticulous planning. It has a long-term impact. This step alone, if it is not thought through properly, can make or break the company, because there has to be a lot of brainstorming around these issues. Unfortunately, the players in the market are not spending enough time in educating the founders that why they should not be there or what are the benefits and they should be there. But the answer will be decided only based on purely on your business plan, the numbers and the matrix which gets arrived over a implementation of the business. You may decide a product in India, but suddenly you see a traction is coming from a foreign market. Freshdesk is a great example there. So they, pivoted themselves out of a US market. They may have started in Chennai, but today Freshworks is a product which has pivoted itself from a US market. Similarly, Pine Labs got started in India, but Pine Labs is getting, all these POS, systems we have seen on when we are giving our credit card. So that company has pivoted itself from Singapore, and now they are very active in Southeast Asia. Multiple examples are there around it. Practo is another company which I remember discussing with Shashank why it should be Singapore-based company, because their product and engineers and the grant they are getting from Singapore government was very different. It's a Singapore-based company. But each company has to decide that thing based on certain set principles. And today those that data science is available, which can help you to make this kind of decision making. Let's go through only to the next one.
Quick pause. So great points, Sandeep and Uni. So on this topic of externalization, right? Are there any startups here who are attending who are considering that? Because looking at the attendees, I don't believe any of them are registered in the US or Singapore. But are you guys thinking of that? Do you have any questions on that or anything else discussed so far? Okay. Let's carry on. I think we can always come back to the
questions. To everyone is to make it little more, participating, ask us question. All questions are relevant, and that's this Sunday morning in asking us questions, because you may be having any kind of doubt. Just ask. If the question is part of what we are doing, we'll take it then, or otherwise we'll take it out little later also.
Hey Sandeep.
Hi.
Hey, good morning. This is from ESI Labs. I have two questions here. One is about the single man company, what you mentioned earlier, right? My company is complete bootstrap, and at present I don't have any plan for investors. So, but it's a proprietorship company. So, do you think we should move to the private limited scheme for a future benefit?
See, I will say yes. Answer is yes at some point, because company will grow up. You will have to, move into that. And I'll also tell you, it is not only investors. When you are going to deal with a large size clients and you will going to deal with larger corporation, for them to enter into a contract, they get a lot of comfort and confidence if it is a private limited company. And other advantages purely from your point of view, when the business is becoming bigger, you have to restrict your liability, because in a private limited company, your liability is limited only to the extent of your shares. For example, if a business has gone wrong, it should not happen. The person can file a case only against the company and not against the individuals. So therefore, today, if you see cost arbitrage or the annual cost of running a private limited company and the benefit it provides, I don't think it is a very significantly high cost. Today, auditors are available for 70,000, 80,000 rupees per annum. Company secretaries are available. So by spending 2-3 lakhs in a year, you can do a full compliance analysis. But again, it depends upon the business model. if there is some more data, we can decide. But whenever your annual turnover, and that's what I've seen, when your monthly billing crosses 1.5 lakh, 2 lakh rupees, it's a good point to pivot into a private limited company.
Okay. I got it. Yeah. Thanks for the details, Sandeep.
No.
No, we had a thought. I just thought of clarifying with you first, so it gave the clarity. Thanks for that. The second question is about the.
Yeah, the conversion happens very easily. ROC today is there. You just come to, any good company secretary, ask us offline. The conversion can happen with few forms. The structure can be changed at any point of time, but we always encourage, because of the liability issues, because of the confidence to the ecosystem issues, to go into a private company mode.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thanks for that.
Sure.
The second question what I have is about the externalization, right? See, currently, very recently we have launched our product, and we don't know who are really our target audience or the country which we are going to get the traction, right? So you mentioned some data available, the data science is available to decide that. Could you give some little more insight on that? What kind of data science is that?
Yeah, so it's a model we have developed internally. It's more like a checklist. I've been part and parcel of 100 plus externalization models, out of which 7 to 8% did not work, but 92% have worked beautifully. So there are multiple components in that process. First is obviously your vision. What do you see? Second is the product. Is there a global reach of the product? And you're right, at this stage, it may not be clear where the product is going to go. It is a very early stage. But what we can do is that fast forward 2 years, 3 years, if a product is going to, get a lot of traction from outside rather than in India, then that is one thing. Then second thing happens that, many times your investors who are interested in the company say, look, at some stage, I want this product to be merged into another company, or you guys to be present in a particular jurisdiction. So that's another data model which comes up, or that's another yardsticks which work up. And again, we say at an early stage, don't even worry about it. You have enough to focus on in terms of product scaling, product expansion. Focus on that. What is the right point to go abroad? Right point is when sales traction starts coming in, business is becoming mature. Just by a simple process, process becomes complicated when you have already done Series A, Series B round. Then to shift is problematic because there is inherent valuation in the company which is there. At an early stage, my request is you don't even need to worry, and we can discuss into what are the various factors which you guys should look into. But at early stage, when a product is developing, you don't know where the customers are going to come from. Just keep working in India and don't worry about these things. But unfortunately, in the market with some of the tech startups, what we are seeing, they hear from some other friend, oh, I am Delaware based company, guys. It's a very fancy thing. It's a very sexy and glamorous things to do. Please don't fall into those pitfalls.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely not. We are proud to be part of Indian company. So that's what we have also mentioned, launched our product on Independence Day.
Absolutely. An Indian eco startup, startup systems, Indian government to giving benefit, the accelerator model, what the teams are doing here. I think all that is very, very encouraging. And now tons and tons of money is coming into India. For a right model, right businesses, there is so much happening in India. And therefore, there is no need to feel nervous or under FOMO, that fear of missing out. I'm not in Delaware, I'm not in Singapore. That is not at all required. And any business, we can discuss and give you a complete scan. You should be there or not there. And it's a very unique model. At Algo, we have developed. Even PwC and KPMG, they also rely on a lot of these questions from our side. And this is purely based on my own working closely with 100 plus companies who are Indian company. They have gone abroad and how successful they are, what challenges they are facing. So those things are there.
I just my observation from some of my experience with other founders, right? There is some myth or assumption that if you say like a Indian company rather than US company, there is a kind of trust or a reputation issue. That's what the observation is. But I don't believe in that. But I just sharing it with you here.
Absolutely, completely agree with you.
I think those are great points. And Sandeep, just to maybe touch upon this other alternative viewpoint that has come up, right? And this is cybersecurity specific to some extent, but I guess generalized to emerging or deep tech space. So you might have some experience in this as well. The point is that for any of consumer-based startups where the market, the Indian market, 1.3 billion people, a lot of Olas and a lot of Swiggies, all those companies, there's a fantastic market here, right? But what we've also heard from cybersecurity startups, right, and other maybe deep tech startups is that the early adoption or the early adopter market for them is really in the West, right? It might be the US, it might be Silicon Valley, it might be Europe as well. So when they start looking at those markets, even before they start off, maybe the inspiration, maybe the motivation for their product genesis comes from those markets, from the startups in those markets that have gaps. And then there's also a trend that you would have seen of the SaaS-based solutions, right? Multiple, software as a service, where on-prem is being sort of very soon replaced by those cases, right? If you combine those two things, SaaS-based cybersecurity solutions in this case, combined with the early adoption market, with risk appetite, funding, and a lot of those much higher in the West. It's definitely growing in India, but it's obviously the traction momentum is much higher in the West. So in those cases, there are, I would say, valid concerns for some of these startups to question about both incorporation as well as, early or maybe in some cases premature externalization, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Would you still, suggest that they start off here, or are there other maybe parts of your model that consider those things?
Yeah, so again, I think great question and great consideration. I always say that let the business evolve, let the business grow. To say that on the, when you incorporate a company, and that's another model we are now evolving, Unni, me, Neha, and a couple of other folks from our corporate secretarial team. What is a life like when you incorporate a company? It's a new baby which is being formed, and I always see business ventures like youngsters who are emerging, and it is a very simple solution that your business will decide the path on its own. What we are saying is don't complicate your life by taking those calls right in the beginning. Let the product evolve. For a product to evolve, correct me, I'm not an engineer, but I've been part of so many product cycles now. It takes about 6 to 7 months from a basic beta version and other things to come up. Focus on that. Your resources are available around you. Wherever your maximum resources are available, it is there. You are not missing anything. Let few customers, the testing being done. And today, because you have a model and a product, so one big question, do I need to be present in Europe or in US to ask someone to start subscribing my product? Answer is no. A customer can be based out of anywhere. Today, if they say that no, for contract basis, like just for experimentation, you don't need. It is only when the business will start and they say, are you US incorporated? I'm saying, why to move your headquarters from India into US? You can start your subsidiary, which is subset of your own company present into that location, which is entering into those client contracts. But to my mind, those stages and things reach only after certain revenue numbers being there. Now, look, when a product is developed, Rajiv, and suddenly we realize the takers are only in US, then it doesn't make any sense. There is no second thoughts. It has to be then structured from there. But what I'm trying to say here is that all those questions are business centric questions, and initial stage there is no need to kind of confuse your life. Lot of things needs to be done, and please keep doing it here. But when business evolves, certain traction is coming, those answers can be formed very easily.
Yeah, great point. So it's good time. I think we have three other questions, three other people with questions on the chat. So we have Mr. Vallabha. Can you go ahead? I think you had asked things on the chat.
Sorry, I can't hear Mr.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Rajiv, can you hear me?
Not really. Vallabha, I think you're, try going closer to the microphone. It's very faint.
Now?
I can't.
Not, yeah, no. Okay. Try again. If not, I'll just read out your question. Let me do that, right? So Vallabha's question, if I can summarize from the chat, is he's asking how does any of these things change for a services-based company, right? So they are a private limited company, but we have only services and they're not product-based, but we are looking to raise funds. Does that change anything, Sandeep?
Again, for services-based company, the question I would like to ask Vallabh is that, is it services in Indian market? Where are your clients which are getting serviced? If the answer is they are primarily in India, so nothing changes from that point of view also. Great to know you're already a private limited company. Only question is of valuation. I will talk about it, and I'm going to bring back the valuation topic. We have a slide on that. Services versus product or a hybrid kind of model, what valuations they will attract. But nothing changes from an externalization point of view. And you can, yes, on the chat I just saw where you can give services. You can give services any part of the world, but the local revenue that you are earning, for example, you are giving services to someone based out of Singapore from India, the local government may ask for certain kind of taxes, which depends upon the kind of services. So one solid rule for all of you is before you enter into any commercial transaction with any country, please make 2 or 3 basic checks from a local law point of view. For example, some countries, France and all, have started saying if you are giving services from remote location, there has to be certain kind of taxes which you need to put. Recently, you must have heard of Google tax and Facebook tax and all those things. So just getting those checks and balances today are very important so that you are not unknowingly trigger off certain laws which later on become problem in those countries. Not too many complications are there for online services, but it's important to check the ecosystem.
Great. We have another question, Sandeep, from Bhavin, who's the founder of Projus. Bhavin, can you please go ahead?
Hi, Sandeep. Hi, Sandeep. A great session. I think it's already clarifying a lot of things that I had in mind. So thanks for that. I have a couple of questions. One, we are an LLP company. It's been 3 years. We've been doing decently well in the Indian geo. And, we have requests which keep coming in from some investors that they want to invest in our company. While, we do not need cash flows right now. But if we want to consider an investment, what is the best option? I mean, because being a partner is not something which is a viable option. Is there any other option which is there, or we'll have to look at becoming a private limited, and only then we can attract such an investment?
So Bhavin, first of all, congratulations. In 3 years, if the company is doing very good, so absolutely great job done. If I am you, I will not even think about it. I will immediately move into a private limited company. I will get a different kind of confidence and comfort to the investors by becoming, because investors, because of the LLP structure, and as you see, the last word of LLP is a partnership. The minute it is a quasi partnership / corporate structure, it creates a lot of doubt in respect to the rights and liabilities which come on to becoming part of this kind of venture. So your goal is to become and to bring a lot of people and increase valuation, and the doubts which are there, which you can control to mitigate, should be mitigated. Business doubts and all are separate, but structural doubts in terms of LLP versus private limited company, with just following a process for 5 to 6 weeks, you can immediately get conversion benefits and then grow company peacefully also. And also there are certain courts which have still not understood what beautiful structure an LLP is today. So they always rate LLP as a partnership, and lot of effort will be required to change the judiciary over a period of time. But therefore they understand the corporate structure well. So it should be done. And I mean, say if you see the cost arbitrage and all, it is hardly even worth mentioning also. Therefore, it should be converted into a private limited company without even knowing your business model. I can straight away give a final answer also.
All right. Thank you so much. So, one quick question on that too, that when we convert a company from LLP to private limited, do we lose a vintage? The number of years of experience or we can assume that we are the same company.
Absolutely, and it is on the presentation that the management team start. And in fact, when I'm making my pitch deck, I will not talk about, I was LLP or this. I will just say that company started as an LLP today, this, and and because conversion will happen, ROC will most likely to let you continue the name advantages and benefits of that. So that vintage is continuing. Nothing is happening. It's just that vintage is what? Vintage is not about a corporate form. Vintage is about the hustle the management team, the founder team has put in. So you have enough track record to show that vintage. And because you are not getting existing investors into the new setup and all those things. So I don't think there will be any issues on that.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, Sandeep. Mohit here. So we are a private limited company. I have a question as in we are talking to few acceleration program and they're talking about taking some equity of the company, right? The question is that model good enough and do you see any issues down the line when we will look for an investor or do you see any challenge down the line with this kind of model?
Hi, Mohit. Can you tell me a little detail? What do you guys do? What kind of business you guys have?
So we just started, right? It's a product company and then it's a private limited company. So in order to get more traction, we were looking for some kind of acceleration program, right? And they are talking about taking some part of a equity from the company around 4%, right? So we were little skeptical whether the equity based program is good enough, and then what are the repercussions down the line?
So,
Okay, just to add it on the Mohit points, right? We all have the similar experience. There are people called accelerators, right? There are so many accelerators are approaching, and they are coming up with some equity system, and they are providing some discretionary fund. They are calling it. So I was not quite confident with the model, and I did not go for it. But there are similar experience I also had.
So we will park this. I have a full slide only on force of funding acceleration models. I will just go there. It's a very good question, very valid question. Again, there is a lot of data points which can help you to answer it. But if you guys allow me, can we park it up to that slide so that we
Yeah,
can
sure.
move over? Huh?
Yeah, sure.
I will 100% take these questions. And very valid question, but we already have tackled it, on pieces. So
there's one another question on the chat with that can be parked as well. It's about investor and exit partnership related
absolutely.
stuff.
So we have a full section on that, and we will talk about it when we go there. Yep.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I've already spoken about only we can skip the case study on externalization model because more questions are coming on kind of investors. So I think, guys, quick high level 10-second thing. There are multiple documents which we require when we set up a company. The key of them is co-founders agreement and interstate agreement. Many times we start a company with a friend, relative, and something and say, "Yeah, boss, you are my friend, I am your friend, kya hoga, kuch nahi hoga." But the point is, the relationship between the people who are coming together should be very clear. There are multiple formats available where profitability, share, liability, companies start on a good note. But what happened that at some point, Bhavin or Mohit or Vallabh, they will be putting more extra effort in the companies and others are not putting it. And there should be those mechanics also, which can be nicely filtered in 3 years. If contributions are like this, some kind of equity has to start getting converted. None of the institutional or a great investor will touch the company unless the inter se relationship, equities, and roles and responsibilities are nicely defined. Many times we have seen that in the investment round itself, founders say, okay, what is the clarity between the founders? say investor will ask this question and founders will say, oh, we never did that. So that's very important. Your terms and conditions around your product, the website, the service offering is very, very important, because that again can, many times founders make a mistake of just downloading something from somewhere. That approach is not good. Privacy policies for your websites is very, very important today. Neha is going to talk about privacy policy, at certain point. Domain, we registered the domain in our own name or son's name, or, say it's a brand name, but the fees is coming from our individual accounts. Again, to remind, you are corporate people, so therefore it should be registered in the name of the company. Similarly, IP assignment agreements, non-disclosure agreements. If you are hiring some critical team members, their agreement, how they will protect your IP database, standard employee agreements. Today I see this approach, people are just downloading from different websites and all. Guys, there is that component of little bit of fees you should invest into. There are some amazing law firms out there. There are some amazing professionals out there who can help you to set up. It is like setting up the base and a structure properly. Then you can multiply. Not at every stage you need these lawyers or specialists around you, whether it is your financing practices, accounting, auditing. Get the structure right from the beginning. It is important when you're making a component of budget that you allocate 1 or 2 or 3% to this, so that you get it done. There are multiple initiatives happening where these kind of templates are being shared and things are shared. So these are some of the very key and critical components which should be focused also when the companies and companies are set up also. Only let's just go on. Only next slide, please.
You're seeing it, right?
The next one.
Sorry, Sandeep, I didn't hear you. There's some disturbance.
The next slide.
Maybe there's
On
a
my
lag.
slide, there's a lag. Sandeep, I am on the next slide on showing other countries.
It's not moving at my end. Others?
Yeah, we don't see.
Okay. Let me just 1 second. Are you see the slide now?
Nope. Now we can see. Yeah. Just put it in PPT file. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So I will request I think IP. Neha,
Thanks, Sandeep. Good morning, everyone. So this is the slide which basically we discussed the IP protection and safeguarding co-founder rights. So I think co-founder rights, Sandeep has already touched upon, so I will not take much time on that. On the IP protection, I think it is important for every organization, whether the startup stage or when the organization is mature, whether in terms of when they're accessing a third-party IP asset or they're giving access to their own IP asset to some third party, it is important to have their documentation in place where the liabilities, the roles and responsibilities of each party is set out clearly. We need to ensure that who owns the IP. We need to know that who will own. Each party needs to own their pre-existing IP. And any IT which is developed during the process, often is the question that, who is owning the IP which will be resulting from that contract? Will that be a joint IP or one party will own it over the other? we could be using some open source softwares. You're all cyber, you are the experts here, and we know that what are the liability or what are the ramifications of open source softwares could be. Just because they're open source doesn't mean the liability does not come along. The liabilities still come along with the certain terms and conditions you still need to adhere to, irrespective of them being free of cost and being open source. Also, where we always suggest, like as Sandeep mentioned, the domain names, the brand names, the trademarks, they should be registered. Even if you think your product is capable of getting a patent, you should apply for it. Of course, the underlying condition is that it should be novel, and if you think the process what you developed is worthy of the protection, it will always help in getting those in place. And also, in some cases, though copyright does come into existence right at the time of creation, but if you think it's novel work, literary work, you might want to get a protection for that as well. And talking about contractual safeguard, as I just mentioned, adequate documentation, whether giving out or taking any IP and license or buying it out, like the ongoing responsibilities, what are the license fee, territory, world. If you know that I need to use it on a worldwide basis, then I need to have those rights. If I want to limit it to a territory, then that should be clearly mentioned in the contracts. Who even vis-a-vis employees often comes the case, you have an in-house team who's developing the assets for you, the IPs for you, the source code or the object code for it. And often we see in the employment contract, those basic clauses are missing, where the employee is creating, he needs to create it for and on behalf of the entity he's working for. But often happens that these clauses are not there, and then it's lying in the air that who owns the IP. The employee might go out tomorrow and start a competing business, but the organization has nothing to fall upon on, because there were no such clauses in your documentation. So this is on the IP protection. We'll skip on co-founders, right? And that's already been covered by Sandeep. So only on the next slide on ESOP, probably you want to touch base on.
Yeah. So thanks, Neha. And I know, you guys have already had a full IP session onto those things. But as Neha said, the proper language, because rights are protected through a language, which is very, very important. So is that there? Only just go to this one. So guys, another reason, hey, company versus private, is important. Neha, you can be on mute. Yeah. So the other reason why, private limited company structure is very important, purely from a point of view of a important tool which is in hand, which is called employee stock options. So when your company start growing up, diluting your equity, let's say you want a star performer next to you, you want to expand in other countries, you want to hire someone. Today, if a company is growing nicely and, you have a cash flow constraint in the beginning in terms of salaries and all, ESOP options can be created. We are not going to do into the technicalities of ESOP, but basically how it works is it is like an issuance of shares with an incentive scheme to the key employees, that if they stick in the company and they do certain kind of results, they will be entitled to certain kind of options, which eventually can get converted into a equity into the company. There are multiple models. There is then ESOP scheme. Scheme is basically terms and conditions, how it will be structured. Then there are obviously grant are the options which are given to the employees, and on the satisfactory conditions, services, period, those can get converted. There is a vesting, there is an exercise. For example, vesting means after 1 year, so much shares or options will become into my window. Then I can exercise. There are multiple schemes of exercising, and basically, if you see, ESOP is the most underrated weapon that you have got in order to incentivize good employees and keep them next to you. Only let's just go to the next one. I think the most important and some of the key points is there that, creation of the ESOP, whether you need to create a trust for early stage startup, trust is not required at all. Just a simple ESOP scheme passed by the board resolution, it is there. Do you need an ESOP consultant? Yes, you need an ESOP consultant because ESOP has multiple ramifications for company, employees, their taxabilities, accounting process. So there is a complete package which get triggers. But at what stage you should give ESOP? Obviously, you should give ESOP when a company business is running nicely. You are looking to get some more external, when investors come on board, the important thing which has happened with one exercise is there is a valuation which has been set up for the company. And therefore, that can be utilized to create an incentive out of ESOP. And also let the company run for a certain period of time, because that will help you to get confidence in the people to whom these options or ESOPs are given. Once an option is vested, it's a legally enforceable right, which cannot be taken away unilaterally by the company or by the founders. You can alter the scheme, but you cannot take away the grants and options which are given. So therefore, they should not be in a rush. Many times founders get into a pitfall of saying, okay, I will give you 5%, 7%, 8%. Yes, at initial stage, if you're getting a CTO or getting a CXO level position and you can't afford too much of salary, you need to do it. But these decisions should be done with a lot of thought and process and clarity. It should not be just rushed. Okay, I know a founder who met an employee in the evening and he said, boss, today your performance was very, very good. I am issuing a letter that, you will be entitled to 500 shares. Now that email went to Mr. X from CEO of the company, you are entitled for 500 shares. Now there is a full process that this can be done only through a board resolution and after thing, but he has already given it. And after 4 years, when company went for an IPO, just before the listing, this employee appeared from someone with that letter and said that I am now entitled for these many things. So obviously, last minute panic, we had to deal with the situation. But, everything should be recorded properly and these decisions should be taken very, very carefully. The commitments around these things are all, as I said, are enforceable. Therefore, it has to be done in a very significant way and in a way that can be handled. The next one. Uni, you want to take this case study? Uni, you're on a mute. Okay, I'll take it up. No problem. So there is a company in an e-commerce space. Can you go to the slide here in a PPT format?
Yes.
Don't change it in between, please.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so there is a company in an e-commerce space. The company has over 1,000 plus employees. There was no formal ESOP, place, and that's exactly what I said. That founder will just keep on allocating shares to everyone, right? That I liked someone today. You have worked hard for the company. You're sitting in office late. Here is 100 shares, 200 shares. Now the problem is when a next round of investment was happening. And one thing that investor will always do very carefully is calculate your issuance of shares. They will get your undertakings. When they say a representation will come, company is properly structured and shares are properly issued. Each and every option which you have also, allocated or granted or announced will be calculated because it goes to the dilution of the shareholding. So therefore, minus any plan when the company was going into an IPO situation or the investment round was happening, multiple such emails started to appear from all direction. As a result, there was a delay in the transaction for more than 6 months. Employees became very vicious. Some of them, they said, oh, now investor is coming, company is valued at 100 million. You have allocated some shares to me. Give me value for that. So therefore, getting a controlled process around it is very, very important. Let's just move on only. I think other important issue is your cap tables. When a private limited company is, started, there are, multiple things around cap table, and Unni will take it. Unni and Rahul will take this cap table discussion.
Yes. So on cap table, so what we have seen is that the company when it is incorporated, it will start with maybe 2 or 3 promoters, and it will be their subscription, initial subscription, and their shareholding, which will be the starting point. But over a period, or maybe the initial few months, or in initial few years, what happens is, when they need a fund, they raise the fund through from the relatives or friends. And generally what we have seen is that the promoters raise small amount from multiple people or many people, and also the dilution will be at a higher rate. So what happens over a period is that you will see the cap table getting complicated, or I would say seeing the many people on the cap table with very little shareholding. And what happens is that when the investor comes and look at the cap table, they see that so many people, around 50-60 people on a cap table with holding 50,000 rupees investment, is becomes very difficult for them to invest, because the corporate action to be taken at the time of investment will include shareholders approval, shareholding agreement, and things like that. So to get a agreement from all of them becomes a very difficult. So ideally, what promoters should be careful about is, one is on the dilution. So dilution should be very careful. I mean, investors will always look for promoters holding to be at a higher rate, and two, that the number of shareholders. I mean, when the initial fundraising happens, I mean, the target should be that to get less people with more money. That's one thing. And second thing is, on the ESOP pool. Always the question comes as to us is, how much percentage to be kept aside for ESOP. So there is no hard and fast rule for that. However, ideally it should be 10 to 15%. We have seen little bit more than that as well in some of the cases. But investors say something between 5 to 15, I would say, is what we have seen. And then comes the time of exercise of stock options. So this exercise of options means, yes, they are the people who are exercising will become part of the cap table. So that's what the promoter should be careful about, that whether they want, or if they have 50 employees, then again 50 employees sitting on the cap table will complicate the cap table. So we have advised in many of the many times that the exercise to be pushed to the exit event. So there are twofold benefits. One is that, yes, you save you save from complicating the cap table. Second is on the tax aspect of it. So because when the ESOP is exercised, the employee is charged with the tax. So he has to pay the tax without getting any income. So there is an outflow from him without any inflow. So we have suggested structures where this exercise happens at an exit event, so that the exit event can be defined as well, to when there is a secondary happening, or when the investors buy shares from the existing shareholders. So there are structures where the time of exercise of options can be decided. And then classification of shareholders. Yes, founders, major investors, angels, ESOP. Yes, it's better to have maybe what does this mean is that investors generally have CCPS. Founders will be holding pure equity ordinary shares. So there are different classes of shares held by each of them. And then investors prefer to have less minority shareholders. Yeah, I mean that's what I was mentioning at the beginning, that investors prefer to have a very very minimal shareholders, and if at all there are few of them, the process that we have been advising is a power of attorney from them, so that the promoters doesn't need to go to them every time when there is a or any other corporate actions are coming up. Then avoid unnecessary classes of securities. So that is another tendency that we have seen is that people come saying that, okay, can we create a different class for one investor, or I mean the friend who is investing, I'm not sure about him, can we create a class for him? So it's better in such cases to create many classes of shares. But yes, you can create few classes, but combine them and define the rights in the shareholders agreement. That's the best way to handle such situation. So this idea, where a promoter diluted almost 40% of the shareholder for initial fundraising with friends and relatives. And so very recent, like last week, we were discussing with a promoter. So he was saying that I diluted 50% for someone who invested around 1 crore, and he's saying that now he is not able to go to other VCPE investors for fundraising, because they're saying that you have already diluted 50%. So that's something which always keep in mind, that don't make your cap table complicated, crowded. One, two, that be careful about how much you are diluting.
Yeah. So I think very interesting learnings and very interesting points that Unni has raised here. And I can tell you, many founders, first mistake I was saying was on externalization and things around that. But the cap table dilution, because whenever you take, and the question was raised on angel investment, and I will obviously, accelerator programs I'll touch upon. But if you want a good investor on your thing, they want to see that you have enough meat in the game for yourself also. Founder, Unni said, and I know someone who came to us just, a month ago, who said, I've raised 50 lakhs. And I said, okay, what is the dilution? He said, yeah, I've already committed 40%. So tell me if by raising 50 lakhs, someone has already diluted 40%, because people don't understand that each and every share and sub share is so valuable. And that is what going to, create, because you have already decided by incorporating a company that business valuations are now tied up to the company itself, and the company's profitability, all those things are fine. But the actual thing which is most important and valuable, the real asset in the company for which can be transferred to be converted into money value is a share. So therefore, that one particular instrument is very important. So whether through ESOP or by going through early friends or friends, relatives, it should not be, given, the dilution should be very carefully protected. Only let's just move on to this section now, where we are going to talk about, the important stages and the rights and how we are going to, create. So whenever, only just go to the previous slide. Yeah. So I think what you see here is the entire life cycle event of how the funding will happen. The funding starts with a very basic, instrument called term sheet. And at the term sheet stage, obviously, what kind of term sheet is there? What kind of rights and liabilities are going to come up? That's important. The next stage is obviously due diligence, because there will be 4 or 5 due diligence which investors will do based upon their internal thing. Legal diligence, financial diligence, business diligence. Of late, there is a trend of doing a technology diligence also. While legal and financial diligence are well defined, in technology diligence, they will see how robust is the platform. If as Neha was saying, if the software is properly licensed, and whether scalability will happen without the system breaking down, and if the system are robust. And on the business side, they will talk to your customers, they will talk to your employees, they will talk to multiple ecosystem partners to make sure that what you are saying is right. Before the term sheet, there is a pitch session which works, that you draw your investment pitches. I don't know, Rajiv, if you guys had a session on investment pitch or not, but that's also a very important session, which at some stage should be done, that how to prepare a right pitch and how to, pitch about your businesses. And there are very good friends in the ecosystem who can come and help you guys on that.
We are planning one session, Sandeep, not yet though.
Great. So that investment pitch, then someone liking your company, they give you a term sheet, then the process starts, then we go to transaction documents, and then obviously the funding process happens. So what is a typical life cycle? As much preparation as you have done, for example, in storing your documents properly, as Unni said, virtual data rooms, and you are efficiently managed by the right set of teams, the funding process can become very, very smooth. Unni, let's just go to the next one. The term sheet, the key aspects are obviously what is the price, what is the valuation, that is the valuation of the business. Somebody says you are valued at, let's say, 100 crores. I'm going to give you 10 crores. So the maths will work. You are diluting 10%. Anyone who will give you money like to protect their upside and downside protections. They want to participate at all stages. How much is the ESOP pool for the employees? Because if they don't want only
Sandeep, Sandeep, hi, Mohit here. I have one question. When you're saying evaluation, right? How will you evaluate a startup which just started with a product, right? They don't have a customer base, they don't have any great transactions and stuff like that. So, what are the key aspects in order to evaluate a startup?
Yeah, Mohit, again, a very valid question. At that stage, they will see the pedigree of the founders, the background of the founders, and the scope of the product which will, come into the market, and if it is coming from a hot sector or not. So these factors, because obviously there is not enough data, there is not enough business traction which can be shown to the investors. So at that stage, the valuation likely to be very, very low, but it all depends. For example, I'm just giving you a thing. Kunal Shah, who was founder of Freecharge was sold to Snapdeal, and Kunal Shah took 1 year break, and he just announced Cred. On the first day of announcement itself, just because there was no product, nothing. And first day itself, Cred was valued close to about $100 million, and he raised $35 million from the market because he had shown a great exit of $460 million by selling Freecharge to Snapdeal. So those things also start working behind the valuation. Now, let's say if today I announce a product which is going to, everyone knows that, COVID-related vaccine has come in. It doesn't matter that, whether I have a pedigree or not, and I have shown enough use cases, business will be valued differently. But I want everyone in this, session to be very realistic that chances of getting high valuation at that stage are very, very low. And whosoever will value you will be value low. And by putting in small money, they will be taking in a lot of shares out.
Right. So it's again a subjective valuation, right? So I can value a startup, let's say 100 million. Another can value 25 million, right?
Absolutely. There is no what you called, what you called a proven theories or things. It is a very subjective thing. It also depends the kind of investor you are getting. Someone who believes in you can value you more, and those factors will work in that.
Okay, thank you.
Only let's
And Sandeep, not sure what you. Sorry, on this topic, I mean, one concept that is used for valuation is the 3 T's, is what I've heard. It's traction, technology, and team, right? So if you have the traction with your, with your customers, with your revenue flows, then that trumps everything, right? It doesn't, the team doesn't really matter because obviously they've shown the traction. But if you don't have the traction, then it goes to a combination of your technology, which is really a placeholder for your product or the market for the product, things like that. So if that is there, then people will value you on that because they don't have the traction to value you. And if you don't even have that, right? So if you just have an idea, and in this case, the Kunal Shah's example is fantastic because then it'll be on the team or the founder. What credibility do they have from either their pedigree, their past experience? Are you a serial entrepreneur? Have you had exits? Based on that, people will project. Again, it's all very subjective. They'll project as to, okay, what is the kind of the product is this team capable of delivering that will meet the market needs, and they will sort of extrapolate the traction from that, right? So the 3 T's, is something that usually comes up. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. And as Mohit was also saying, it is a very subjective exercise, but his question that we have just started. So, what will be the valuation? I always tell all the founders that for first 6 months to 8 months, try to get more resources from your side to your close family and friends, because any external person coming may not be able to give. And when the traction start coming in, that's the stage when multiple set of investors will start, coming up. On this slide, there are obviously certain amount of disagreements on valuation, and negotiations will keep happening. Each side keep presenting their thing. And also, when you're going to the choice of investor, you should see that the investor can back you up in the follow-on rounds, because at some point it becomes very important to not to get someone who is just coming for one investment, because some kind of commitment should be taken from a future rounds point of view. Only let's move on. I think we can just skip this slide. I'm more interested to go into the hardcore. On this slide, I think, guys, we have been saying that each and every document that you record, sign, or execute is going to be discoverable by the investors. If you're making any commitments in the air, trust me, everything comes into the surface at one stage or the other. So record it. Before giving anyone any kind of incentives, you need to be very clear. Your corporate organization, issuance of shares, whether it is, that's where the question is now. I'm an LLP. The compliances in LLP are different from a private limited company. An investor would like to see no problems in the company, and your data, your processes, your compliances should be absolutely in order. There should not be any hindrances on issuance of shares to investor. For example, I took a 1 crore loan from my friend who has a conversion rights. They will say that, boss, unless you don't deal with the loan or don't convert it, I am not going to touch upon your company. So whatever commitments you are making with respect to your companies have to eventually unfold and get into a tangible results out for the investors. So that's why it is very important. Condition precedents are the conditions which you need to fulfill before anybody will put in the company. For example, domain name is registered in Mohit's name, but Mohit has to assign the domain name back to the company. Rajiv has issued certain kind of promises to Mohit and to Bhavin and others. Those has to be sorted out well before an investor can come up. Your disclosure schedules are very important. They will ask you to take representations and warranties. Today, market is at least becoming very, very good. They are not forcing people to say that you have to give representations and warranty from your personal side also. Anyone asking you for that, please don't take that kind of money, because you have started a company and a business, and it's only companies, reps, and warranties which are important in this process. Let's just move on, only. Yeah. I think let's come to a section which is very important, that what are the sources of funding which are there. As I said, amazing amount of funding is there in the market. The funding across various sources is growing. There are multiple reports, and I'm very happy to hear 2-3 things that accelerators are approaching for the funding. That means that one source of funding is already available. So, and there are multiple institutions, there are individuals, there are promoters, there are angels, there are seed, there are accelerator. All these institutions are available for funding. But what is the kind of business I'm running? What is the kind of product? What stage I'm in? According to that, the source of fund can be utilized. Just keep going on. If you see, there are multiple reports. There has been startups have already done more than 10 billion worth of venture capital investment has been drawn in 2019. A multiple set of investors are coming up, setting up shops. We ourselves are working with 40 plus investors, various stage, early stage, late stage, growth stage. All those things are there. What they want to see is very simple. Team is, good. Team is hungry. Team is passionate. Product is good. Product can be scalable. Traction is there. Can it be a global product? What is the hustle of the team? Is it a service plus, product model, or how much is the productization alone? SaaS model, people say it is SaaS, but what is a breakup of a component of a product versus services in that? So all those things will, eventually lead to the things. And there is also a big increased focus on real sustainable business and the capital efficient model. And especially in COVID times, there were so many term sheets which were there floating around in March, and they all went down the drain because of the reason that businesses were burning money. Burning money today is not going to get and attract any kind of capital. Only let's just move on. So we have just made a simple chart, and now I will take upon the questions which were raised that accelerators are coming. When you're going to raise from friends and families, if you see the chart, the stage of business where they come up at an early stage also. Like if I have an idea, my brother, sister, friend, relative, you please don't force your in-laws to put in money. That can, raise different kind of problems. Just kidding on that piece. You can't tell your wife, hey, Neelu, I'm starting a business, ask your father to do it. That is not counted as investment. That is counting forced investment. So please don't go into that. Angel investors, there are a lot of these people who are flushed with money, founders who have made tons of money. They are out, deep pockets. They like to go and take early stage bets. Accelerator is a very interesting phenomena which is happening. And thanks to Y Combinator to start this process worldwide. You know what Y Combinator did, and I hope to hell everyone knows what Y Combinator is. If not, please go and read about them. They went and they changed the rules of investment in the worldwide market. The underbelly of the venture capital investment changed. Before these accelerator programs started to come up in 13, 14, what was happening was that VCs, which were like putting $2 to $3 million kind of investments, were the only viable option. So a lot of businesses were getting strangulated at a stage where they needed only $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, and they wanted to move on to reach to that stage. But Y Combinator came and they democratized the early stage investment. They started calling for cohorts. Like what we are talking here is an excellent set of 10 to 12 cohorts who are there. Companies which are forming a cyber security cohort in this institution. So they started coming in. They said yes, they will give a very small money, but what they give is an entire ecosystem to you. So to the questions which were raised earlier, if an accelerator is worth its salt. Now, please, there are a lot of these mom and shop accelerators. Some of the property dealers are calling themselves as accelerators. So the background check of these accelerators is very important. What are they offering? Are they just giving you some money and taking 4-5% equity, or they are creating an ecosystem like what Rajiv and Karthik has done here? They are bringing all the experts on board. They are helping you. They are genuinely interested in the business. So those models are very important. Now, the question was whether I should dilute 4% by becoming part of an accelerator and taking the capital. No harm in that, provided other factors which an accelerator program should do are there. You go to Y Combinator's website and see how much help, how they transform the founders, right? So if I want to go and join hands with an accelerator, idea is I will go and join hands with the accelerator who is up above there, right? It is because they bring in technologists, lawyers, marketing experts, finance experts, and they start taking up your business. Any person who is joining as an accelerator to you wants to accelerate your business, scale up your business, and take you to a different level. I will take a pause so that I complete those questions and maybe, we can talk about it. And then obviously venture capital and private equity are people who will fund at a different stage. They will give a different kind of money and their process will be different. But this chart, and obviously we are going to share the files with all of you, but please read through it. And Rajiv, we can take up those specific questions now.
Great. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second. Let's go to the questions on the chat, and then we'll come to others as well. People have raised their hands. So Who's it? Pavan, Cybersena, is still on? Okay, let me check. I think a couple of people had to drop off. Okay, so Pavan, yes, can you hear us? Can I read out your question? Okay, let's do that. So Pavan says they have an investor from Singapore. Discussion is under process. They are exited for the partnership. Not sure what that means. And we are not sure about it because our company has just begun its operation. So what suggestions do we get as beginners? How do we move forward? Pavan, if you can hear us, can you clarify what your specific question is? Okay, looks like we don't have, well, I see him, but we don't have him on the call. Let's go to the next one. Nanda from Digisec. Nanda, can you share your question?
Hi, good morning. So my question was regarding senior member, very senior member joining a team as a director, board of director, and also working full time. Okay, but he's not a co-founder because the company is already incorporated 1 year back. So what kind of agreement is suggested before he onboards, right? If you can just give me some clarity. And he also holds a considerable equity in the company. So just wanted some suggestions from legal point of view. Thank you.
So first thing, the terms founder, co-founder, and co-investor, investor, these are all jargons which are floating around. Who is a founder? When we step back, there are multiple parameters. Anyone who is going to spend significant time and is holding certain amount of equity beyond a threshold is also a founder. It does not matter that he came only on the early stage. Yes, they can be early stage founders, but in a journey of the company, founders keep coming up. To structure this kind of agreement, I think it's very simple. Anyone who is joining a company in a full-time position as a director, basically they are an employee. These can be a key management employee. They are coming at a board level position. So certain set of rights will float from the board obligation point of view. Certain things will float from a equity holding point of view. Certain thing will float from an what you called an employment point of view. And the roles and responsibility, if the person has invested and got equity, they have not invested but got equity because, as we were saying, these are like options or these are the incentives you have given for that person to come on board. Accordingly, whatever are the expectations, roles and responsibility can be culminated. We can call it a director's agreement. We can call it a senior management agreement. Nomenclature can be anything, Nanda, onto that.
Okay, yeah. Actually, there is no investment from this person. It's just like we are compensating.
Absolutely, I got it. So, when we said in ESOP section, Nanda, that you will handle them as you have given certain options. You have already done your part of the thing. Now this person has to bring the value to make sure that he or she is entitled for those shares which company has already given, and what you expect from them in running the business, increasing the sales, opening up a markets for you. Those things should be very properly recorded in the annexures to that agreement also.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right, so let's open up the floor. So quick time check, Sandeep and team. We have roughly about 15 more minutes. Any other questions? I think there was someone else trying to ask.
Yeah, I have a question. Sandeep. Sandeep, we've spoken about investments through equity primarily. Can you talk a bit about how acquisitions happen and what are the key aspects to consider during an acquisition?
Absolutely. So, Bhavin, acquisitions happen, strategy which many companies, and I'll tell you the base of Algo Legal in 1 year, how we are 55-member law firm is we have acquired 4 different law firms. Acquisition happens because I'm acquiring a business. I need to pay consideration for that. Consideration can be in 2 formats. I can give a cross equity in my business, or I can pay a pure play cash deal. So congratulations to Reliance. They are in a shopping spree. Future Retail, which was in their shopping cart, has now been checked out. So if you study that acquisition, very nice study in front of us, they have done acquisition on 4 different formats. They said, we will take care of your liability. So consideration is, let's say X. X can be divided by someone saying, I will take care of your liability. That can be put into consideration bracket. I will give Mr. Biani, I'll give you 10% of the shares. So that can be another form. It is a share swap kind of, consideration. And third and plain vanilla is pure play cash consideration. I'm taking over X, I'm paying you Y cash. So that is there. And fourth is a very hybrid kind of a model, which is saying that you are projecting my business is going to be 5x, and therefore I'm acquiring today. It is only when it is 5x, I will pay you 25% of more consideration. So that is it. So acquisition has multiple strategies. And, in your space, if you're, for example, Baiju has recently acquired White Hat. I'm sure all of you would have heard. It's a pure play cash deal because Baiju is in a rush, flushed with funds. They don't want, hot business like White Hat to go to some other competitor. So they just paid that. So it depends upon the product that you want to acquire. You can always also do, instead of acquiring a full company, you can do what we call a acqui-hiring, that you just want a product team. So in Quant Legal, which I started as a legal tech company, we acquired only the product and the teams. We did not acquire companies. The difference here is I went to company X in Pasadena in Los Angeles, and I said, I have nothing to do with your shareholding. I want Mr. XYZ as developers, and I want this product and the team attached to this product. What is the price? They said it is $100,000. We paid them cash and made sure we just acquired the asset that we can do. So there is a company acquisition, there is an asset acquisition, and there is only a team acquisition which can happen.
Thank you so much, Sandeep.
Sorry, at times I get into my professorial mode and I can keep going into these things, and we can do maybe an acquisition.
Sandeep, Mohit here. Again, I have a question, right? The earlier question about the accelerator, right? So you briefly described about the accelerator and what value they bring. But in this specific context, what I'm talking about, so they are pure accelerator. They are not doing any kind of funding, right? There are 2 type of accelerator which gives you some kind of funding. So they are pure accelerator. They bring all those machineries in place and they charge 4% equity. So does it sound good? Is it happening in the system? And then what are the value points? And then more from the funding side, right? Does it hold any backlog or any concern while we are raising fund down the line?
So Mohit, the question is, any funding that you take, any accelerator you join hand with, any investor you get on board, the question is, do you need it? That's a very basic question. But purely by getting an accelerator on a mode, and if you are convinced from the previous companies they have accelerated, there is a value addition they have shown, there is a proven track record, and you think that joining hand can take your business from X to 5X over 1 year, which you will take another 3 years to do on your own, there is no harm. And by getting an accelerator on board, is it going to make the incoming investor to look bad? No, absolutely not. In fact, they will get very excited that Mohit is not a closed entity. Mohit's business is an open entity, and Mohit has shown that the business can work within external parties and they can scale it back together. And that gives a lot of confidence. But what Unni said is also important. Don't go for too much of dilution in the beginning. So 4%, 3%, and they are going to give you tangible benefits. It is a very good percentage. You can do that. But the question I will always keep asking you back is why you need accelerator right now? What is the end objective? And a diligence on accelerator is very important. And my humble request to all friends on this call is, guys, taking money is very easy. I'm honestly telling you, there are multiple sources to get that. It's not their diligence on you. You also have to apply equal amount of mind that why I'm getting that person on board. What are the benefits out of it? It's not only money. Is it going to help me when that money is coming? Is that person is well networked in the ecosystem that he will meaningfully changed certain things and other things, those questions should also be asked. And Mohit, there is no harm in going through accelerators, provided, because there is a flush of accelerator today. There are some 600, 700 accelerators operating all around. As I said, some of the family offices have started calling themselves accelerators. So you should get a right partner on board. Investors will love it if an accelerator is there and it has led to a significant outcome also.
Thank you, Sandeep. Makes sense.
Okay, I think we'll just rush through the other foils only. Just let's do a rapid fire. Let's go to the next one. I already said why we should get the right VC. We can, skip that. We have only, I'll tell you when to change the foils. Okay, so now move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Let's skip the case study I've already covered. Basically, in that case study was that when you're getting, to Nanda's point, Nanda, you got a external person on board. Why agreement is important. Tomorrow, if that person is not aligned with you on your goals, you're already offering an equity. It is very, very important that an exit mechanism in the agreement is also put in, that God forbid, if the relationship is not working, how we can go back to the basic positions where we started without burning any bridges. In this case, a live company, we are helping them. They got a very good external person on director, gave equities, but in 3 months only the relationship went sour. Today, they are all in a deadlock situation because this woman founder is not, the new co-founder, external founder is not going out, blackmailing to the company that this will happen, that happen, and company is not able to raise any equity. So it's very important that exit mechanisms in those agreements are also properly structured. Only let's just move on. Skip this piece. Just go to the next one. We can skip this piece also. Let's just straight away hand it over to Neha for the privacy section also. Yeah, Neha, over to you. I think Neha is on mute. So Neha, please.
Am I audible now? Yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sandeep. So since we only have 8 minutes now, I'll quickly, touch base upon the legal landscape in India on cybersecurity. In cybersecurity in India, it is not defined, and as we say in case of any other laws, it is we do not have one dedicated legislation which deals with all issues relating to cybersecurity. However, having said that, the Information Technology Act 2000 is the main act which governs basically the cyber laws in India. Before I go into the details, it is important to understand that the cyber laws, at least in the Indian context, is covers actually 4 aspects. One is cyber crimes, like we know, data theft, phishing. Similar to that, DOS, denial of service, as we popularly it is called. And then the other aspect is that protection, which is provided to the and recognition, which is provided to the electronic documentation and signatures. The third thing is intellectual property rights, and the fourth leg being data privacy. So very quickly touching upon all these 4 aspects, the cyber crimes as it is do not find definition, cyber offenses do not find any definition in the act. But we do know that, we have an IPC which has offenses defined therein. So any offense which is combined with a computer or is done through a computer resource would qualify as a cyber offense in simple terms. Having said that, the IT Act also has some provisions which deals with, if not all, at least most of them. We have under the IT Act, we also have various rules and regulations which govern issues relating to various matters. We have one for the data privacy, we have one for the cert. Now, it is important to understand that you all are operating in the cyber space, and any products you offer or any services you offer, you have to be compliant with these laws. That's why it is important to understand what these laws are and how are they placed and what happens, what do you need to do and what will you need to do when as business as usual, and what if there is a cyber crime or any of the other incidents, that cyber incidents as we popularly call it. So my team, that is as we popularly call, this is a ministry which is responsible, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which is the nodal government ministry taking care of the cyber security. They also have established CERT-In, that is an agency which is responsible for basically collecting all information, assessing all information relating to cyber incidents. They issue out guidelines from time to time. They also collect data that how many cyber incidents have been reported and how they were resolved. Having said that, there is no mandatory requirement of reporting of incidents, even if it is. We do see organizations do not report it. We always want to get out of it, because once you report it, it directly hits on your business, because your reputation that there was a data breach or there was an incident which happened. Probably you're not following the protocols which need to be followed. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So as I just mentioned, we cover all of this. There could be cyber crimes against persons, property. It could be against the government. Intellectual property, we're mostly concerned with copyright, because that is something which is quite, though there could be other incidents as well, but mostly it is copyright when you are going online and impersonating anyone or taking out somebody's data. Electronic documents and signatures. In 2008, when the IT Amendment Act came in, they gave recognition to all electronic documents and signatures. Various laws across were redefined to, like the Indian Evidence Act, to recognize that the documents could be executed electronically and they'll be valid. Only four or five documents which cannot be executed online or they do not have validity as such, like power of attorneys and the sale deeds. Apart from that, almost every document can be executed electronically and will hold good even as an evidence in a court of law. Now, coming to the one important aspect is data protection and privacy. On the next slide, please. Now, the data privacy in India, as we all know, we are yet to reach a stage where we have a full, enlarged, elaborate legislation in place around data privacy. Till that time that comes in, data privacy is protected under the aegis of the Information Technology Act. We have dedicated rules called Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures and Sensitive Personal Data or Information. These rules basically define the broad guidelines that any data which relates to a person needs to be protected. You need to have certain policies in place. You need to have certain consents in place before you can process data. This is not as elaborate as the popular GDPR, but we do have a PDP bill, the Personal Data Protection Bill, which is pending for approval. And once we have it, it will be as elaborate as GDPR. Having said that, right to privacy is still a fundamental right. It has been recognized by courts, numerous times, and also in the latest Puttaswamy judgment that to have one's information protected is a fundamental right, but of course it's subject to reasonable restrictions. Apart from that, each sector, if you're providing services to a medical institution, a clinical establishment, you should be aware of the fact that they have their own set of regulations. DSHA, as we popularly call it, is similar to HIPAA in US, which is under consideration. Once that is, so industry-wise, if you're providing services to a fintech, if fintech is your field, then you need to be aware that RBI has itself laid down certain considerations. Their data localization norms, their payment and security systems need to be secure. You need to store data in India. And similarly in the insurance sector, similarly under your broadcasting sector. So we need to be sure that we are supplying services or goods to an outside world, and we're compliant with all of these laws. So one is awareness of these laws, second, implementing these laws, and Third is, if there is any issue, we should be well prepared to take an action which is compliant with the legal obligations we have. That pretty much sums up. If there are any other particular questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Great. I think, Neha, this is really good. And yeah, I don't think there is any other slides left, right? I think that's it. These Neha has already covered. Very happy to
Neha, is it okay if I put you on mute? I think there's a lot of background noise.
Sure. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so I think this is from our side, and loved doing it on early Sunday morning. Any questions, please let us know. We are very, very excited to be part of this bunch of people and good set of companies also.
Thanks, Sandeep. So any other final questions? I know there's been quite an interactive session. We had some questions during.
Yeah, just one question I had.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Chetan from Seconize. Are bug bounty programs legal in India? Can anybody just go and start, finding issues in any of their assets, web assets, and then start reporting? Because what we have seen is, as per laws, you cannot go and trespass anyone's property, right? So are these even legal in India?
Which one? Can you repeat it?
Bug bounty programs. Where anyone can go and find issues in your site, or they can try to hack it and find issues.
So very interestingly, those issues have not been yet challenged in India, but to the point, if you see the IT Act very clearly, anyone coming into your site and trespassing it, there are safeguards measures in the IT Act, and there is already a debate going on ethical hacking, no hacking, and those things. But Supreme Court has clearly laid down judgments under the IT Act that just coming and attacking into some of those issues are not going to be accepted on the face of it. So, but the law is evolving, and it's just not a very clear position as of now. Neha, I don't know if you have any view on that, but that's what.
Yeah, and even for we have some rules and regulations in place regarding that, but that is permissible for the government departments. So private parties are not, not supposed to do that. They are not actually prohibited to do that. Yeah. So there are guidelines which are called information security practice and procedures for protected systems. So if you are not basically breaching any of these, or you're not breaching of any of them, then probably you can do it, but it's a gray area still, as Sandeep just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a big topic, specifically for cybersecurity companies, especially Sandeep, in the space called what is known as VAPT, Vulnerability Assessment and Penetration Testing, right? So a lot of the startups in our cohorts are work in that space. So they have products that essentially find holes in other in any other software or your network configuration and things like that. So one way to demonstrate that is, yes, they can go to a client, set up an agreement and do that. But that obviously, I mean, the client initially has to be convinced that they need the security services, right? So typically what happens in general outside of India, at least that I'm aware of, is there are multiple programs. And it's also called this responsible disclosure, right? So let's say Google has a program called Project Zero. So if they find a problem in Microsoft Internet Explorer, Edge Explorer today, right, then they go and they do a responsible disclosure with Microsoft. And under this policy, I don't know the legalities behind it, but they have certain agreed upon guidelines that the vendor or the customer that, well, sorry, not a customer yet, but a company that was reported to, in Microsoft in this case, has 90 days from the reporting time by Google for them to acknowledge that they have a problem and to potentially put in a fix. And after 90 days, no matter if Microsoft has, and this is just an example, no matter if Microsoft has acknowledged or put a fix in place for the problem, Google in this case, or that particular Project Zero, they can go ahead and publicize it, right, on the internet. They can put out a blog saying, on such and such a date, we found this thing, we reported it with all the communication. And from then on, anybody, right, even potential attackers can hold up that information. So I think that is like a huge sort of a policy, legal, technology debate when it comes to the cybersecurity landscape. And I don't think we have, like Neha answered, I don't think we have a clear-cut sort of a legal mandate here, but that has big implications to Chetan and companies like that.
And the area is also evolving, and that's the development will happen. I think
absolutely.
For companies introduction, I think we don't want to hold people back from our side. What we'll do, you can Rajiv connect us with all of the founders, and we will obviously love to hear more about the companies and where we can help them and all. But so that thing it's a very good session, and we love the energy of this session. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think let's start the session. So thank you very much, Sandeep, Unni, Neha, and Rahul. I think this was, personally for me, this was one of the most informative sessions. I certainly learned a lot. Hopefully the startups attending learned a lot as well. Thank you so much for the effort, time, and the presentation that you have put together. We will definitely make this available online as well for others to leverage. And so, Sandeep, just to get some more clarity, if any of these startups would like to engage with Algo Legal, with your company, what's the best way for them to reach you? Is it through us, or is that what you prefer?
Yeah, so up to you, but you can connect them with Neha and Unni directly. Unni will share the email IDs and all. And, a lot of stuff is free on the website. Unni will share the things. Nanda asked for the agreement. There are some of those agreements already free on our website. So please go ahead and do. But we are available. I mean, so this is not about any kind of commercial pitch. We have very nicely worked. Things are there. But wherever we can help and, we can engage, very happy about that. And Unni and Neha and Rahul are the point people. You can connect them to that.
Fantastic. So we shall go ahead and share. If anyone is interested to engage outside of HACK program, please let me know, and we shall connect you with Unni and team. So,
thank you.
Yeah, so thanks once again for the wonderful session, Sandeep and team. Really appreciate it.
Great. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neha.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.